Welcome back, everybody. My name is Nick, and this is Swivel Thinking. And in this series, we are learning how to use Git and source control. And before we actually can go ahead and use it, we need to do some setup. So this video is going to be all about setting up our project and our accounts so that we can then use it in the rest of the videos in this series. Firstly, we are going to set up a GitHub account. So if you already have a GitHub account, you can skip that part, but I'm going to walk through it just for the people who don't have an account yet. Secondly, we're going to connect our GitHub account to Xcode. So after we make that account, we need to make sure our Xcode knows that we're connected to that account so that we can push and pull from GitHub down to Xcode on our local computer. And the third thing we're going to do is set up our GitKraken account and then connect that to GitHub. So GitKraken is a third-party service. It is a GUI, a Git user interface, which is basically going to give us a really nice, easy to use, friendly UI for working with source control in our project. So in this playlist, we're going to perform all of our Git actions twice, once using Xcode and once using GitKraken. So if you don't want to use GitKraken, you don't have to. You can just follow the Xcode part. Although I will leave a link below where you guys can download GitKraken for free and at least use the free version while you're following this playlist. Personally, I highly recommend actually paying for GitKraken. It is something that has saved me thousands of hours and headaches as an engineer. But if you don't know how to use Git yet, you actually are not going to understand just how powerful and important having a GUI is. So my recommendation will be to at least install the free version for now, follow along, and then when we get towards the end of this playlist, you'll be able to make a pretty informed decision on whether or not you actually need to use a third-party GUI. I think the ideal situation would be that Xcode Source Control is good enough that we don't need a third-party tool, but unfortunately that is just not the case today. As you guys are going to see, the GitKraken user interface is gorgeous, and it really does become your best friend. So without further ado, let's jump on the computer and set up a GitHub account. Welcome back, everybody. Again, we are learning Git and source control in this playlist, and this video is going to be mostly just setup so that we can hit the ground running in the next video. So friendly reminder, anyone who doesn't know so far, we do have a website, swivel-thinking.com. You can see all courses on this website. The courses here are listed in the best order to watch them in. And on the homepage, you can sign up and add your email here if you want to get discounts to upcoming courses. I'm going to be making a paid course soon, and discounts will be pushed to the email chain only. Without further ado, let's get going here. And before we get into it, let's first talk about what it is that we're actually doing here. So quickly, I just went on ChatGPT and I said, what is Git and source control? So at a very high level, these are techniques to basically manage code changes in projects. So source control is a system that records changes of files over time. So think about it as you're going to be working on this project, and over time, you're going to be making changes. And as you make those changes, source control or version control is literally documenting all those changes. It's like a history of all of the changes of your code base over time. And one way to think about this is in Google Docs. If you ever used a Google Doc, people are always in there constantly changing the data in the Google Doc. And sometimes you can revert back to past versions. So it's sort of like that, where everybody's making changes, and version control or source control, whatever you want to call it, is just tracking all of the changes. So this way we can compare the changes to an old version if we want to. And Git is just a specific type of version control that has become the mainstream source control that almost all developers use. So Git and source control are not technically the same thing, although they're often used to describe the same thing, because most projects that use source control are actually using Git. So when we are working with Git and source control, we have this concept of remote and local repositories. And it's basically, am I saving my content on my home computer or on the remote repository? You can think about it as the cloud. So am I saving it locally or am I saving it remotely? And when we save our code remotely, so we push it up to the cloud or to the internet, we need somewhere to host all of those files. So if you just are using Git on your computer, obviously your computer has a record of all of those changes. But if there's other people on your team, guys, the only way that you guys can have a unified history of all of the changes is if everybody's pushing to the same location in the cloud or on the internet. And to do that, we will use a hosting service to host our remote repository. So the same way that I have a file saved on my computer, I also want to save that file out on the internet so that I can either re-download it later or other people can see it as well. So to host the Git and version control of our project, we're going to use Git. So GitHub is a hub or a website that hosts projects under Git source control. Git and GitHub are not the same thing. GitHub is the hosting service for Git. And I asked ChatGPT, I said, what are alternatives to GitHub? And two really popular ones is GitLab and Bitbucket. So if you don't want to use GitHub, these are probably the top two other alternatives that you can use for hosting your Git on the internet. But GitHub has become by far the most popular. So the first thing that I'm going to have you guys do in the series is create an account on GitHub. Some of you guys probably already have an account, but if you don't, just go to github.com, add in your email address, and create an account. I'm not going to walk through that whole process. It should be pretty seamless. Thousands of people create GitHub accounts a day. It is free. There is premium versions of GitHub, but you're not going to need it for this course. So pause this video, join for free, set that up. Once you set that up, you should see a basic profile set up here. This is my profile. We're going to talk about how we can make readmes for your profile and how we can add projects to it. But right now, just make sure that you have your account. You can see your own personal profile, and this way we can start using it. Awesome. So once you have your GitHub account set up, the next thing we want to do is connect GitHub to Xcode, because Xcode is on our local computer, right? And while we're working in our Xcode project, we occasionally are going to want to save and push our files up to GitHub. And we're going to also want to pull them back down and retrieve them from GitHub. So we want to make sure that Xcode, our Xcode account, is also connected to GitHub. So firstly, set up your GitHub account. And then once you have your GitHub account set up, let's open up Xcode. Let's jump into Xcode settings and go to accounts. And on the left here, you're probably going to have your Apple ID account that you already have set up. But regardless whether or not you have that, we're going to click the plus down here, and then we're going to find our GitHub account. So go down to GitHub, click continue. So first we need to add in our account. So this is going to be your GitHub username, whatever you just made it. I think you can also use your email here, but start with your GitHub username, and then we're going to need a personal access token. So you're going to go back into GitHub. You're going to go to the settings in GitHub, wherever it is. And then there's a tab for developer settings. And the developer settings has a personal access token. We're going to use the classic tokens here. We're going to generate a new token, make it a classic token for now. So when you go to create this token, you're going to want to name it. I usually try to just be very explicit, like, Nick's personal MacBook, Xcode. So this is my personal MacBook, not my work MacBook. And this is going to be for Xcode on my Mac. This is just a token so that GitHub has authentication, knowing that it is actually you trying to push and pull. Expiration is how often do I need to refresh this token? This gets really annoying. I guess 30 days is like a security measure. So every 30 days, you would have to come in here and generate another token and then update that token in Xcode. So that's what this is saying. How often do you want it to expire so that you have to create a new one? So I guess there's an inverse correlation here. The more secure, the lower the expiration, right? If I have to change my token every 7 days, that's pretty secure. Chances are, even if somebody were to hack it or steal it, 7 days later, I'm going to fix it. So GitHub's recommending us to make this 30 days. I personally make this 1 year because I don't want to come in here and I don't think anybody's hacking my Xcode, but I want to tell you guys how long to make it. I would go maybe 90 days for now if you're just starting. Select scopes. This is going to basically ask you, what do you want this token to be allowed to do? Because you can restrict different tokens to different things. So you can imagine if you're adding your token to some special API service on the internet and you only want it to be able to do very specific thing like read only or write only. You can come in here and you can check. Only the things that you want it to be allowed to do. Generally, especially if you're just starting, I'm going to check everything. Let's just say this account, my personal account, has access to everything on GitHub that we're allowed to do. So I'll just check all of these. And I wish there was a select all button. That would be nice, GitHub. And then generate token. And when you generate your token, it's going to give it to you one time. You're not going to be able to see it again. So make sure you copy it, paste it into Xcode, and then sign in. And hopefully that does connect. All right. After you've connected your GitHub account, it should come up here. You should see it on the left, GitHub account. And once this is set up, there is like some bug in Xcode that I want to warn you guys about. So basically, once you're connected here, I would force restart Xcode. So quit it and open it back up. Sometimes when you're signing into these accounts, for some reason, it doesn't immediately work. So it's a good idea, I think, once you just connect it, restart Xcode just to give it a fresh slate. The last thing we're going to do here in setting this up is just go to the source control tab. There's a Git. We want to make sure that enable source control is checked. That should be checked by default. And then in the Git tab here, when we go to actually make these commits, and then we go to actually push our data up to GitHub, how do we want that to be authored? So we can put in our name here, or you can put in your username, and you can put in your email. So this is basically going to be if other people are looking at your code base and other people are looking at changes, they're going to see your name and your email alongside those changes. The purpose here is for like teams, right? So that you can see who should I reach out to about this code. So this is where you're going to set up your author status. If it is just you working in a project, it's really not going to matter. But just put in your name, put in your email, and you're going to see this come up when you commit your changes later. There's a space in Xcode to ignore files. So later when we start pushing and pulling all of our files from GitHub, there's going to be some files in some projects that we actually don't want to be saving. We don't want them to be pushing and pulling every time. And so then we can ignore them here. There's also something called a git ignore file, which we will talk about in a future video, where we can also, it's a second way of ignoring files. This way is specific to Xcode, but the git ignore is more general for the Git project, not just taking into account Xcode. And the last thing we're going to talk about here is using a GUI. So basically, right now we've set up GitHub. It's a remote repository for all of our code. And then separately, we're going to have a local repository for our code. So on my computer, I'm going to have a version of my project. And on GitHub, I'm going to have a version of my project. And every time I want to save my version, I'm going to push it up to GitHub. Every time I come back to the project, I'm going to pull down the most recently saved version from GitHub and pull it back down to my local computer. So this way, if user 2 or someone else on my team saves to GitHub, I can then pull down their changes. So when you're sharing code between developers, it's not that user 1 is sending code to user 2. It's that user 1 is going to save code to GitHub, and then user 2 is going to see that the GitHub repository got updated, and they're going to pull it down to their local computer. So think about it as the source of truth between the developers. So it's always going back to GitHub. There's no arrow between user 1 and 2. It's not an email where you're sending your data from 1 to 2. We're going to push it up to GitHub. This person's going to pull it down from GitHub. We're going to push it up to GitHub. This person's going to pull it down to GitHub. So the next thing we're going to talk about now is using a GUI, a Git user interface. And the reason this is relevant is because when we are doing these pushes, like sending the data up to GitHub, pulling the data from GitHub, there's a ton of other commands other than just pushing and pulling. But when you're doing these processes, there's a lot of work. It gets really confusing, and there's a lot of things that can go right as well as things that can go wrong. And sometimes it is easier to use a third-party tool to help manage this process. So what we're talking about now is basically when I'm user 1 and I want to push the data up to GitHub, or I want to pull the data from GitHub, what service am I using, or how am I doing this arrow here? How am I pushing? How am I pulling? And there's basically many different tools that you can do this. So if I open up Xcode and I go to the Integrate tab, there actually is a source control list of actions here. This tab on older versions of Xcode was actually called source control. So within Xcode, there are actions I can take to do exactly this, to push it, to pull it, etc. So for most cases, for most developers, Xcode works. We can use the source control within Xcode. That doesn't do everything, but it does most of the stuff that most projects and developers and teams need. We're going to go through the user interface, but when we get into it, the actual interface of interacting with source control within Xcode is fairly limited. And if we compare it to other alternatives, there's actually other alternatives that are significantly easier to use than Xcode's. So that's what we're going to talk about now. So alternatives to using Xcode Source Control. So firstly is the old school way of using Git. Before Swift was even a language, before Xcode was even a thing, the original way of performing Git actions was actually in the terminal. So you could open up your terminal and you could run Git commands from the terminal. So when you wanted to push your code from your local repo to the remote repo, you go in the terminal, you could change directory to your project, and then you call git push, and it pushes it to GitHub. And that works. The problem is using the terminal is difficult. And it's definitely not as easy as using Xcode, where you can just say, hey, integrate push, right? Obviously, this is much easier, much more convenient than using the terminal every time. And so in this series, I'm actually not going to use the terminal at all, frankly, because I actually don't use the terminal on a day-to-day basis. There are plenty of YouTube tutorials on how to use the terminal and how to use Git on the terminal. But frankly, I think it is harder to learn Git through the terminal than using these other user interfaces. So we're going to primarily use Xcode's interface for source control, but we're also going to use a third-party interface called GitKraken. So let's get Kraken. So I have a link below to GitKraken. If you use it, it's my affiliate link. I guess we both get a chance to win a $100 Amazon gift card if you sign up through my link. But GitKraken is a GUI. In my mind, it's the best GUI on the market for being actually a visible user interface for actually seeing what's happening in your project. So click on that link below and you can sign up for free through that link. And then you should be able to have access to a free version of GitKraken. I'm going to talk a little bit about this before we move forward. Firstly, GitKraken is not the only GUI on the market. If you go and you Google best GUI on the internet, you're going to get a bunch of articles. Here's one from Git. Basically, GUIs is a Git user interface. Think of it as if I use the terminal and I call git push or something like this, I can't actually see what's happening here. I have no idea what's happening other than the output that is in the terminal. And a GUI is literally a UI, a user interface for this. So it lets me see exactly what is happening in the source control. That's what a GUI client does. And so I think the idea is that eventually Xcode's GUI will be so good that we don't need a third-party one. But as that stands today, it is not the case. And so there's a bunch of other really popular GUIs that basically just do all the stuff that you can get through Xcode, all of this stuff. They make it more user-friendly, they make it easier to use, and there's actually more tools in these GUIs than available. So a popular one is GitHub Desktop. Another really popular one is SourceTree. This one is actually free, but my favorite one that we're going to use is GitKraken. Tower is also becoming really popular as well. It's also a paid one. This is a place where when I was first learning how to code, I thought it was crazy to spend money for a GUI. Now that I know how to use Git and the power of the GUI, this is quite literally the first thing that I purchase every year. It is the most important software tool that I pay for, hands down. I am not getting paid if you guys sign up for GitKraken. In fact, it's actually free for you guys to sign up, but I highly recommend paying for this because as you guys are going to see in the course here, Git and source control is your best friend, and being able to really have a good grasp on Git will save you thousands of hours a year. It will save you so many problems that you might have in terms of merging, in terms of pushing and pulling and knowing what is happening in your repo. Like if you're following my channel, I have never recommended purchasing a single thing on my channel to date. This is the first thing that I would highly recommend for anybody if you can afford it. There are free alternatives. You can use GitHub Desktop, you can use SourceTree, but personal experience, knowing what I know today, most of you are going to fall into the bucket right now of, I don't need this, I'm not going to pay for it. We're going to go through this course, and eventually you're going to realize, wow, I probably should have paid for it. So I'm telling you right now, this is something that I highly recommend, and I very rarely recommend people to sign up for things. But if you don't know source control or Git, this will help you become an expert within days. So my recommendation here is sign up, even if you're not going to actually pay for it, although I recommend you do, but sign up for free. And then once you are signed up, there should be steps on how to connect GitKraken to GitHub. One thing I like about GitKraken is they have pretty good docs. So there should be documentation in there on how to connect your GitKraken to GitHub. It's very similar to what we just did with Xcode, except for GitKraken. Then once you're done with that, download the GitKraken app for Mac. So this is what my app looks like right now. And you can see that I have this integration with GitHub. It's all connected. And now I can open up my repos. So for example, one of my personal repos is the Swiftful routing repo. And this is what I love about GitKraken is how this user interface here. It's literally a visible tree diagram, and we can see how the different branches have all merged. We can see it over time. It's very easy to check out one of these old branches. I can literally just double click on one, and now I've checked it out. Now I'm on this branch. I can move up here. I can check back out to this branch. I click this button up here to push. I click this button up here to pull. There's undo and redo actions. There's a lot of really cool stuff in this product that we're going to talk about in this series that just makes it easier than using Xcode. So with that said, by the end of this video, you should have created a GitHub account, connected your GitHub account to Xcode, and then optionally created a GitKraken account. I recommend doing all three. If you don't create a GitKraken account, you will be able to still follow this course because 90+% of what we're going to do, you can do. As we go through this course, I'm basically going to do everything 2 to 3 times. I'm going to do it once through Xcode. I'm going to do it once through GitKraken, and then once through the GitHub website itself. So a lot of the actions, not pushing and pulling, but a lot of like the merging and things, you can actually do on github.com. So those are going to be the 3 ways that we're going to do basically everything going forward. Again, I highly recommend signing up for GitKraken if you can afford it. This has been a lifesaver for me. It has saved me thousands of hours and headaches, and is the first tool that I actually recommend engineers to purchase. So now we should be all connected. In the next video, we're going to actually create a project. In the next video, we're going to talk about creating a project and cloning a project and look at a bunch of different ways that we can do that. Thank you guys for watching. As always, my name is Nick. This is Swiftful Thinking, and I'll see you in the next video.